and happening today. I mean, the line is out the courtroom. Closing arguments, they are set to begin in the murder conspiracy trial of Lori Vallow Daybell, who's accused of conspiring with her brother to kill her then husband, Charles Vallow.
12 News journalist Erica Stapleton. She has been following this case closely. She is live outside the courthouse where this is expected to pick up this morning. So, Erica, we can see the folks behind you. I know, I take it some of those folks are media. Who's lined up there waiting to get in? Because normally this does not happen in a court case.
Right.
No, Justin, Emma, we could expect it for this case, though. I've covered this since she was convicted in Idaho, where people actually camped out to get into her sentencing. So we know there's a lot of interest in this case, and for good reason. I'll show you a little bit more of the line here. We have media up front. We're in a separate line, and don't worry, I have a spot. I'm planning to get into the courtroom this morning. And then we have the rest of the public, which is a combination of people who are familiar with people in this case, some relatives of people who have been impacted by this case, and then just members of the general public who are just interested in all that's happened and all that's transpired, because this case has affected so many people. And just to give you guys a bit of a backstory, this is the murder conspiracy trial for Lori Vallow Daybell. She's accused of conspiring with her brother to kill her former husband, Charles Vallow, but this is not the only time she has stood trial. Now, she was convicted back in 2023 in Idaho for killing her children, Tylee and JJ, who used to live here in the Valley, and conspiring to kill her current husband's first wife, Tammy Daybell, her current husband being Chad Daybell, who's also been convicted in Idaho and sentenced to death in that state. So as you can see, there's a whole web of people impacted by these crimes here. And what's been interesting about this trial is that Lori Vallow Daybell is representing herself. So we've seen her cross-examine people on the stand. At times things were tense in court. So it's been really interesting to see this play out. And where we left off last week is the state rested its case against her, but then she said she plans to rest too, and she hasn't said that in front of the jury, so there's still a slight chance that maybe she'll take the stand, but as of yet she said no, and we're expecting to go right into closing arguments throughout the day here.
That's what's interesting, is that we don't know if she is officially going to rest. And that's had a lot of people, especially online, wondering, okay, could she actually take the stand? And when you look at this case, Erica, she doesn't have a lot to lose if she does take the stand. I mean, she is going to be spending the rest of her life in jail anyway. What do you expect to happen today? Someone who's just been following this so closely, what do you think is going to happen?
I think it sounded like she wanted to take the stand, or at least wanted to put on a case leading up to this, because she was adamant about trying to bring in her own experts. She wanted to bring in witnesses, some of them being her own family members, some being people who have been impacted by her crimes, or her alleged crimes in this case. So it was really interesting to see her try to, put forth this list. And a lot of people were stricken just because of time constraints. She didn't file things properly or in a timely fashion. So it seemed like she wanted to put on a case. But where we left was that she said no. And even, the judge said, okay, you have until before closings to make a decision, but you should let us know before that, because that could change jury instructions. And she said, my intent is still no to take the stand here. And she said that some people who were under subpoena still for her case were going to be released under subpoena. So I think that's a strong indication that she's still not going to do anything. But again, there's that little bit of a chance, especially because this case has thrown so many curveballs already. And like you said, Emma, it seems like she might have nothing to lose. Once her cases are done here, she has another trial coming up once this one wraps up in Arizona. But she's going back to Idaho, and she's going to be in prison for the rest of her life. So it's really interesting to see her fight this tooth and nail in the way she has, given the situation she's in. But her crimes are horrific that she was convicted of there. So it makes you really wonder about her mentality as she's proceeding in court in the way she has.
How do you think that she did in court? We had an attorney on here on Friday who thought that she kind of did surprisingly well, but then you hear at some points during this trial, she would be lashing out at witnesses and
emotional.
Just she was emotional. Even some of the hearings before she got into trial, she was getting into it with the judge. So how do you think that she did? What was that attitude like with her?
Justin, it's been interesting because we did not hear much from her in her Idaho case. It was just her sentencing, where it was really the first time we got to hear from her, because she had representation there and she didn't take the stand in that case either. So it was, interesting to hear her for the first time. And in that case, I recall the judge saying, it's obvious you're still in a religious delusion, just based on the way that she was talking about things and going through that. And, you know, it's interesting because here, we've seen her cross-examine people at sometimes, you know, it was combative. And it's been really interesting just to see her navigate the court system, because it's obvious she does have some level of understanding of what's going on. She's using terms that you would expect a lawyer to use, but then the judge was also very clear that he would be treating her like a lawyer. So it's super interesting to see her navigate in court. And you're right, there definitely were times where things were contentious with the judge. The judge often had to stop her and say, you can't ask a question this way. That's technically testifying. You can't be doing that. So she was, you know, I'll say scolded a few times in the courtroom, at least once a day, it felt like. And there were a lot of objections from the prosecution as well. And what's interesting, and I'll say what stood out to me, is that the prosecution was, you know, Trina Kay, the prosecutor on this case, has been pretty level throughout and called her witnesses, has kept the same demeanor, whereas the jury was seeing a ton of different demeanors from Lori Vallow Daybell. She would sometimes kind of come up and be a little mousy. She would be nice. She would giggle a bit, especially talking with investigators. She'd be like, is that how you say your name? Is this how you know, she would try and be proper and polite. And then you see her get really tense. And one witness that comes to mind is a woman who went on a date with Charles Vallow the night before he was killed. And she kept asking, like, well, did you just talk about me on your date? And there was some really tense moments back and forth. And I think maybe the most jarring for me was when she cross-examined her own brother. This is her brother, Adam Cox, not the one she's accused of conspiring with, but this is a brother who, you know, knew Charles, was close with Charles. They were planning an intervention because they thought Lori was kind of going down this dark path. And he was just, you know, in shambles at what ultimately would happen. So he testified against his sister, and she came up and cross-examined him and said, oh, Mr. Cox. So it was just really, really surreal to witness that. And I would imagine that the jury is picking up on that too, that you see this change of behavior as she navigates the courtroom.
Gosh, it's so interesting, and it honestly is must-see TV. Erica, when we talk about sentencing, if she is convicted in this case, a lot of people are wondering, what does it matter? I mean, she's spending the rest of her life in Idaho. She's convicted of killing 2 children, for goodness sakes. So what does sentencing actually look like? If she's convicted here, we're talking conspiracy to commit murder. So what's the sentence? And does she just serve it concurrently with what's going on in Idaho?
So the sentence here, if she does get convicted, it essentially would be on the record, but she's going back to Idaho no matter what to serve those sentences. That's life in prison. And some people have said, why even bother trying this case? And then the next one, another murder conspiracy case. And, you know, of course it's costly. There are resources being spent to house her here in Arizona, to extradite her, and of course the resources for the prosecution. But you got to put this in the vein of justice. And there are more victims in this case than just her children. This is her former husband. And then the next case that we're expecting to start later this spring is, you know, she's conspired again with her brother to kill her niece's ex-husband, who ultimately survived. So I think that case will also be interesting because we have a living witness who we're expected to hear from. So it's about justice. And when you get these things on the record, it opens the door for victim services when people are impacted by this case. So I do think it's important, and I know that's why these cases were ultimately brought forth, especially because, no, it doesn't really make a difference. She's going to be incarcerated for the rest of her life, but I think it does matter to people impacted by the crimes that were committed here that there is some sense of justice in this case and that there is a day in court. So it'll be interesting to see how that transpired. And I know I've mentioned she's conspiring with her brother. This is a different brother, Alex Cox, and he comes up in all of this, but what's interesting is that he died before charges were brought in any of these cases. So he can't be charged in these cases. And I think it would be really interesting to hear from him. I know we can't, but obviously he's a key player in this and was in Idaho too. So I'll just point out that he can't face charges because he's no longer here.
Erica, just really quick, I have one last question. Is she representing herself in this next trial?
Do we know yet?
Do we know yet?
That's her plan as of right now, but I'm curious to see if the outcome of this trial may change that for her. If for some reason, she gets convicted and might say, oh, maybe me representing myself wasn't such a good idea. I think we hear from defense attorneys all the time that it's never a good idea to do that. So she maybe would change her mind, or maybe she changes a plea. We don't know. But as of right now, that's her intention, and I don't see that changing just seeing the way she's navigated everything else.
All right, Erica, you're going to be in that courtroom today. We are really looking forward to what happens and then to also hear your expertise in your wrap up. We so appreciate the work that you've been doing. There's no one in the Valley who's been more dedicated to this case or these cases than you. So my goodness, the work you've done has just been so informative and so helpful for this community. So thank you.
So we are going to be streaming today's closing arguments right here on 12+. You can watch it throughout the day for continuing coverage, and then we're going to have analysis as well, because as you can imagine, there's going to be a lot happening in that courtroom there. We're also going to be on verdict watch as things develop, so stay with 12 News.